The winter sun hung low over the Rappahannock River, casting long shadows across the frozen earth. The town of Fredericksburg lay in ruins, its brick homes shattered by artillery, its streets littered with splintered beams and broken glass. Smoke drifted lazily above the rooftops, veiling the December sky in a gray haze. In the Confederate lines, men waited in silence. Their breath formed pale clouds in the biting air. Some sharpened bayonets with steady hands, others fingered worn letters from home, as if the faint ink could shield them from what was coming. Among them stood Sergeant Richard Rowland Kirkland, just 19 years of age. His uniform was patched, his boots scuffed from countless marches, but his eyes carried the calm focus of a man who had seen too much, too soon. He listened to the distant thunder of Union guns across the river. The sound rolled like a storm preparing to break, steady, relentless, inescapable. By midday, the Confederate position was braced behind the stone wall at Marye's Heights. The wall stretched along the sunken road like a fortress, a cruel advantage in a cruel war. Colonel Cobb rode past, his horse's hooves crunching over the frosted ground. "Men," he called, "this is where we stand. The enemy will come, and they will break upon this wall like waves upon a cliff. Hold the steady, and remember what we fight for." The soldiers cheered, but their voices carried more fear than triumph. Kirkland knelt beside a comrade, adjusting the strap of his haversack. "Steady, Tom," he whispered. "They'll come soon enough. Best not to think too hard on it." Tom gave a weak nod. His hands shook as he loaded his musket. All around them, men crouched low, eyes fixed on the fields that stretched toward the Union lines. And then it began. The sound came first, drums and bugles across the fields, faint at first, then swelling like a tide. Soon, the blue lines emerged from the smoke, ranks upon ranks of Union soldiers advancing across open ground. Their bayonets glinted like silver under the weak sun. "Steady," came the order. The Confederates waited, hearts pounding, as the Union line marched closer. At 100 yards, the first volley roared from the stone wall. Smoke burst forth, rolling in thick clouds. Men fell instantly in the fields, their cries lost beneath the thunder of musket fire. Again and again, the blue ranks surged forward, only to be torn apart by the unyielding wall. Kirkland fired until his musket grew hot in his hands, his shoulder bruised from the recoil. The air was suffocating, thick with smoke and the acrid stench of gunpowder. The cries of the wounded echoed across the killing ground, a chorus of agony that would not end. By nightfall, the fields before Marye's Heights were carpeted with bodies. Thousands of Union soldiers lay dead or dying, the earth soaked in frost and blood. The stone wall had held, but the victory felt hollow, poisoned by the sheer weight of suffering. Darkness fell over Fredericksburg, yet the battlefield did not rest. From the ground below came voices, pleas for water, for help, for mercy. The wounded lay exposed to the freezing night, shivering, crying out for relief. Kirkland lay awake, his back against the cold stone wall. Every cry carried into his ears, into his heart, until he could bear it no longer. He closed his eyes, but the sound did not fade. Around him, other soldiers shifted uneasily, pulling their blankets tighter, pretending not to hear. Some muttered prayers, others pressed their faces into the earth, as if silence could drown out the cries of the suffering. But for Kirkland, the night became unbearable. Each voice called to him like a summons. Each plea was a dagger that would not let him sleep. At last, he rose to his feet. The campfire burned low as Kirkland approached his commander's tent. He paused outside, heart racing before stepping in. "Colonel," he said firmly, "I cannot stand it any longer. Those men out there, our enemy, they are dying for want of water. I ask permission to go to them." The colonel looked at him in shock. "You'll be killed the moment you step over that wall. The Yankees will see you and shoot you down where you stand." "I know the risk," Kirkland replied, his voice steady. "But I cannot sit here while men suffer within sight of my eyes. With your leave, sir, I must try." The colonel hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Do it at your own peril, Sergeant. God go with you." Kirkland saluted, turned, and walked back into the darkness. His mind was calm, though his heart thundered in his chest. He filled his canteen to the brim, then gathered as many as he could carry. When he looked once more toward the stone wall, the cries of the wounded seemed louder than ever. Tomorrow, he would step into the open field. Tomorrow, he would test whether mercy could survive in the midst of war. ... Dawn broke cold and merciless over the battlefield. A pale sun rose behind a veil of smoke, casting its weak light upon the ground strewn with thousands of motionless forms. Among them, the wounded stirred faintly, their groans cutting through the silence like broken whispers. From the stone wall, Confederate soldiers peered over the edge. What they saw below was a vision of desolation. Blue-coated men clutching at the frozen ground, some raising feeble hands in search of help, others too weak even to speak. Sergeant Richard Kirkland tightened his grip on the filled canteen slung across his shoulders. The night had been long, haunted by cries that would not let him rest. Now, as the first rays of sun touched the field, he knew there was no more waiting. He turned to his comrades, his face pale but resolute. "I'm going," he said simply. The men stared at him in disbelief. One shook his head. "Richard, you'll never make it back. The moment you step out there, they'll drop you." Kirkland gave no answer. He placed a hand on the stone wall, vaulted over, and began to walk toward the cries. At once, Union rifles lifted from the distant lines. The flash of bayonets caught the light as men raised their weapons ready to fire. Kirkland moved steadily, his canteen sloshing against his sides. He bent low beside the first soldier he reached, a Union private, his uniform torn, his face gray with pain. Kirkland knelt, cradled the man's head, and pressed the canteen to his lips. The soldier drank greedily, eyes widening in disbelief. "God bless you," he rasped, voice barely a whisper. Still kneeling in the open field, Kirkland braced for the crack of musket fire. But none came. The battlefield, so deafening the day before, was now silent save for the groans of the wounded. Confederates watched in awe from the wall. Union soldiers, rifles poised, held their breath, uncertain, and in that fragile silence, Kirkland rose and walked to the next man. For hour after hour, Kirkland moved among the fallen. He gave water to some, adjusted coats over the shoulders of others, lifted heads from the frozen earth so they might breathe easier. When his canteens ran dry, he returned to the wall, refilled them, and stepped back into the open killing ground. Not a shot was fired. Men who had moments before been bitter enemies now watched with reverence as a single young sergeant carried out a mission of mercy. Confederate soldiers called him "our boy." Union soldiers whispered in disbelief, an angel among us." One witness later recalled, "It was as if the war itself paused to watch him." Near the Union line, an officer lowered his spyglass and shook his head slowly. "That boy," he murmured to those around him, "is worth more than all the generals on this field." His men nodded, some wiping their eyes as they watched Kirkland kneel beside yet another comrade. On the Confederate side, Colonel Cobb stood silent, his lips pressed tight, his gaze fixed on the sergeant, moving through the carnage. He had given permission reluctantly, believing Kirkland would not return. Now he felt something stirring, something beyond the reach of orders, strategy, or flags. It was humanity itself, rising in the midst of destruction. By midday, the sun stood high above the smoke-stained sky. Kirkland moved with slower steps now, his body weary, but his spirit unbroken. He did not stop until every man he could reach had been given water, comfort, or a final word of solace. When at last he turned back toward the stone wall, both armies seemed to exhale at once. Rifles lowered. The silence deepened, heavy and sacred. As Kirkland climbed back behind Confederate lines, his comrades pressed around him, silent at first, then murmuring in awe. "You walked among death," one whispered. "You shamed us all with your courage," another said. But Kirkland only shook his head. "I did what had to be done. No man should die without a drop of water." And with that, he sat down, his hands trembling, his face lined with exhaustion. The cries of the wounded still echoed faintly across the fields, but for a brief moment, amidst the ruin of Fredericksburg, mercy had spoken louder than war. When night fell again over the fields of Fredericksburg, the guns at last grew quiet. Snow began to drift in thin flurries, settling gently upon the frozen ground where so many had fallen. Kirkland sat by the dim light of a campfire, staring into the flames. Around him, his comrades whispered of what they had witnessed. They spoke of bravery, of defiance, but above all of the young sergeant who had stepped into the jaws of death without raising a weapon. Some called him reckless, others called him blessed, but none could deny that for one brief day he had given the battlefield something greater than victory. From the Union side, word spread quickly of the angel who carried water. Soldiers who had cursed the stone wall now spoke of the lone figure who had walked from it with nothing but canteens and compassion. Even in the bitterness of defeat, respect was born. The war did not end at Fredericksburg. For Sergeant Richard Kirkland, battles still lay ahead. Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, Chickamauga, the names piled like shadows across the years, each one marked with fire and blood. Yet among those who fought beside him, the memory of his deed never faded. Whenever the march grew long, or the night grew too heavy with dread, men would whisper, "Remember Kirkland at Fredericksburg. Remember the angel." Kirkland himself never spoke of it. When asked, he would shrug and say only, "I did what any man should." For him, the act was not about glory, but about duty, the duty of one human being to another, no matter the color of his coat. In September of 1863, at the Battle of Chickamauga, Kirkland once more led his men into the fight. The air was thick with smoke, the forests alive with musket fire and the roar of cannon. Amid the chaos, Kirkland moved as he always had, calm, steady, unyielding. But war spares no man forever. A bullet struck him as he pressed forward with his regiment. He fell upon the field, mortally wounded at just 20 years of age. His comrades gathered around him, grief etched into their faces. One soldier later wrote, "We lost more than a sergeant that day. We lost the best heart among us." Years passed. The guns of the Civil War grew silent. The smoke cleared, and the nation struggled to heal its deep wounds. Yet the story of Richard Rowland Kirkland endured. Veterans from both sides carried it home, telling their families of the boy who had defied death to bring mercy. In time, he came to be known as the Angel of Marye's Heights. His name was spoken with reverence in both North and South, proof that even amid the bloodiest of wars, humanity could still rise above hatred. At Fredericksburg, where the stone wall still stands, a monument now bears his likeness, canteen in hand, bending low to aid the fallen. Travelers pause before it, soldiers salute, and children learn his story as a reminder of what courage truly means. History remembers battles by numbers, casualties counted, positions gained, ground lost. But sometimes, it remembers a single man, a single act that shines brighter than the fire of 1,000 guns. Kirkland's gift was not in the shot he fired, nor the orders he obeyed, but in the choice he made when no one else dared. He showed that in the heart of war, there can still be mercy. And so the question lingers for us who live in quieter times. When the world around us grows dark and fear holds men silent, will we have the courage to step forward? The story of Rowland Kirkland leaves us not only with memory, but with challenge. A reminder that even in the harshest hour, the measure of a man is not what he destroys, but what he saves.